back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I have stayed away from sports just to piss off all those people that told me to stick to sports for all that time, the last 100 days. I'm actually getting back into a sports vibe this week, other than just Luke and I talking about the Ravens or the Orioles. We've done so much on politics, so much on race, so much on the mayoral race, that I just wanted to empty out my Rolodex this week for my favorite people to talk to about baseball, because it's the 4th of July and America, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to throw a text to my favorite all-time sports writer and see if he'll text me back, and he did. Steve Rushin is here, and he showed up on my timeline last week with his Sports Illustrated piece, and he's always had this incredible way to find the weirdest ways to look at sports and make them humorous and use great words to do it. But left hanging an ode and a wave goodbye to the sports handshake. Rushin, I haven't even met you. Are we not going to high five when I meet you? Is that really true?
I'll bump elbows with you. I've been asked, are we really going to stop shaking hands? I should tell you, I'm not an epidemiologist. A guy went to shake my hand yesterday, and I shook it. I Purelled myself as quickly as I could after, but not in his presence. So you tell me. I don't see why guys are going to tackle each other in a football game, but not shake hands after. I mean, in sports, I think, of all places, it's the least likely to be, the handshake is the least likely place to disappear.
Man, these are weird times, right, bro? I mean, you spend a quarter of a century running around writing about sports and whatever. Then sports just sort of stops, right? And for all of us, which is the weirdest of weird things, especially for those of us who've done this for a living and make our living doing this. And then the notion that we're writing about things like the high five going away, right? Or even the DH in the National League, as far as strange bedfellows. But all of this has created a whole different dynamic of conversation, I think, in every way, right? I mean, you married a famous athlete who plays a team game that we're saying, could you play basketball or can you not? Can you play tennis? Can you not? Can you play golf? They're going to try to play National Football League football. I'm looking at this as we sit here on the 4th of July and say, yeah, sure, you're going to have a real baseball season with 60 games and keep 30 teams healthy. And I know they're trying hard and there's a lot of money, but I don't see that this is going to be pulled off.
I don't see it at all either, and thank you for making me feel sane, because we're all confined to our houses, and I don't talk to enough people these days, and I sit here wondering, am I the crazy one? Wondering how any of this is going to happen? You can't spit in basketball, you can't sit on the bench, but you're going to pass the same ball around, or are you going to play with separate basketballs? I can see tennis as long as you don't shake hands at the net. PGA is obviously playing, but explain to me again how they're going to play college football.
Well, I mean, Clemson couldn't even have workouts, right? They got 37 kids sick. And the other part of this that's incredible to me is we act like these football players are living in a bubble. And we saw the video of the tennis player out partying 2 days ago after 2 weeks ago saying he's going to quarantine. The whole deal. That being young, being foolish, I'm older now, and my wife's had cancer twice, and I've worn a mask for 3 years of my life trying to keep her alive. And we went down to North Carolina last week. Nobody's wearing a mask. And, there really is something missing here with information in our society as for what this is, when we're rationally all day talking about them passing a basketball around, and I have to Purell my hands after touching an elevator knob.
It's ridiculous. I don't know how many ways to say it, and I sound like a 105-year-old man shaking my fist at the sky when I'm only half that age. But read, find some good sources of information. You have an internet connection. You should be able to figure this out. I don't understand, how wearing a mask became a political statement, or not wearing a mask became a political statement. I don't understand how a virus became somehow partisan. I mean, it's absurd. But all of the talk that I do is preaching to the choir. I think if I'm talking to you, chances are you're not crazy, and you already agree with that.
Or are we at a different point now, like as we get older with kids, and I see you and your wife have a good time with your podcast and your kids and whatnot. Aren't we what we tell our kids? I mean, I would smack my kid right now, and he's 36 if he weren't wearing a mask. You know what I mean? I'd have to shake him up, and I know a lot of the 36-year-old kids are shaking their Trumper parents about it, right, or whatever. But I think this is a point where we protect our loved ones, and that's the part that really is the tragedy for me, as I saw whole families running around without masks on, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my, oh my. That's the hardest part for me. Sports aside, for all of this, it's how are we all going to get through this thing, whether we play 60 baseball games or not?
Well, I think if you want leadership on these, the NBA was a leader in abandoning sports when Rudy Gobert tested positive, and we all saw that game is the next day everything was being canceled. But I think what a moment of leadership would be now is to say we're not going to play. Yes, there's zillions at stake, and yes, there are television contracts, but the idea of going to Florida, of all places, to resume all these leagues, in the case of baseball, flying around city to city without your 60-year-old bench coaches because it's too dangerous for them. I mean, it seems to me that the leadership would not be to say we're going to restart sports for all those people who have missed it. It would be to say we're not going to have them because it's not the right thing to do.
Steve Rushin is our guest. Nights in White Castle is still out. You can buy that, Stingray Afternoons, any Sports Illustrated, and a great cover story about an ode and a wave goodbye to the handshake and the high five. You can follow him at Steve Rushin out on Twitter as well. You and I had a little fun about Fred Lynn, and you tweeted something about Fred Lynn in Lynn, Massachusetts, and where we are with Cam Newton, and Newton not being the only town in Massachusetts. But our background's very similar in growing up with baseball, and now I guess we own Minneapolis and Baltimore as places where significant cultural events have happened in regard to policing in our country. Some thoughts about baseball in all of this 4th of July weekend, Steve, and the fact that baseball's shutting down and the labor part of this sort of rearing its head in the way that it does for any kid like you or kid like me who loved Tony Oliva or Yaz or Fred Lynn and lived through the 70s and 80s and 90s and became sports writers. The ugliest part of baseball, the labor part of it, and all of that has come back out in the wash over the last 30 to 60 days. And it makes a 52-year-old guy like me who can spout off the Juan Benitez and Rick Burleson references to you from 1974. I don't find myself in that in 2020 with the 2020 Baltimore Orioles, who may eke out an 18-42 finish this year.
Well, I mean, but on the other hand, if you win 31 games, you've had a great season. So look on the bright side. What did the Tigers start 35-5 in 1984? Then the season's almost over for them. You get a team with single-digit losses, but
one more reason to have guys on a 3-man rotation again. Hey, it's only 60 days. We're not going to blow them out, man.
when you and I were kids, we didn't get into baseball because of the collective bargaining agreement. We didn't know what it was. We didn't care. You mentioned Juan Benitez. You texted me about Juan Benitez last night, and that name, man, I actually had to look up how many. It's like, I think Juan Benitez played for 10 different teams. I looked up. I think he played for 9 different teams, all in the American League. And seeing Juan Benitez's new baseball card each year. You mentioned, Luis Aparicio, and I could instantly. I mean, I haven't thought of this card in 40 years, but I could picture what I assume was his final Topps baseball card, backhanding like an invisible grounder with the Red Sox on his 1974 Topps. So, I mean, that's why I was into baseball, and it wasn't because of. I didn't know there were labor agreements and things like that, and so.
You found that in 81.
Well, yeah, I found out. In fact, yeah, absolutely. But the reason I mean, and I talked about. I don't think we should resume these seasons. I miss baseball as more than the next person. I wish they were playing, but to have a season that is a joke, a 60-game season that will not align with any other season in history, including the '81 season, a season in which the home run king might hit 19 bombs or something. I mean, it's not going to make any sense in a historical context, and to have that.
The Orioles won more games in '81 than any team and didn't make the playoffs. How about that?
Well, there you go. And many people have pointed out the Nationals wouldn't have made the playoffs in a 60-game season last year. So what will it mean? But to have that coupled with the labor situation, it's doubly inane. But I'm not one of these epochs on both their houses people. I think this one sits with the owners, and what do they care really? Jim Crane wanted to have fans in the stands in Houston. I mean, these aren't
deep thinkers.
People doing it because they loved the 1974 Tops when they were a kid. I can tell you that.
Well, Steve, I mean, it's been a little while, minutes since we got together and your book came out and whatnot. We didn't even get to talk about the Astros cheating at all. It's like it didn't happen at all now, right? Like that was the story on March 13th before this whole thing went crazy, right?
Well, we certainly been given other things to talk about in the world since then.
But I remember that was a big deal.
Was that? When did that come out? Was that 4 months ago? Was it 27 years ago? I can't remember. Was it in that number of news cycles ago? I long for the luxury of talking about in grave tones about the Astros cheating scandal, because it is the first thing on our minds when we get up in the morning. It isn't anymore. Hasn't been for what seems like 100 years, but man, it will be it will be refreshing when the Astros cheating scandal is the worst thing on our plate in any given day.
Well, we still haven't punished Jose Altuve for wearing the wire, have we? Right? I mean, that's where the conversation would have been. I guess that's a normal baseball conversation. Do you have anything you want to say on that? I don't know that I recall you writing anything about it, but that was a hell of a thing when I was on vacation with my wife, which is where I was at the time, in middle of the night, and I'm out on Twitter, and I'm literally watching the trash can banging, and I'm watching Altuve say, "Don't take my jersey off" after hitting the home run, and thinking...
And you're watching Zapruder slow motion video of, was that a button that popped off his shirt, or was that a Mission Impossible style bug? Was it a buzzer? What was that? No, I didn't. You're right. I didn't write anything about it, but I did just on my own go into newspaper archives with to remind myself, or to discover for the first time, and there were buzzers being used 100 years earlier, 120 years earlier, and so the whole history of cheating in baseball, and almost the whole history of baseball, has run parallel to efforts to circumvent the rules of baseball, from early buzzers to the center field at the Polo Grounds, spyglass, trying to steal signals and the shot heard around the world, all that stuff.
I met Jason Grimsley once. He crawled through a space in Jacobs Field to steal a bat, for crying out loud.
They're literally Mission Impossible style, crawling through the ductwork, right? So is it terrible? Of course it is. I mean, it's terrible. But my moral indignation has moved on to other things since that happened, but I do hope that when baseball resumes for real, whenever that is, that we revisit what the penalties, or the historical penalties anyway are, for the legitimacy of their championships and all that.
Steve Rushin is my favorite sports writer. You can find him out on Twitter at Steve Rushin. That's Rush, like my favorite band, with the N-I-N. And, for years ago, I recall you writing something about sports and its essential nature in America, right? And dare I say that we should all throw the bus under each other as longtime sports writers, and my sports essential nature of my radio station since 1998, my career since 1984. This is literally all I've ever done, and over the last 18 months, I've moved to doing this Baltimore positive thing. I was going to run for mayor. The criminal lady didn't win, so I didn't run. There's a lot of things that go on that move you later in life and in different ways. But going back, if you had to write about essential sports now, 10, 15 years later, however long it's been, and in the middle of this incredible dark time in our not just for the leadership in this TV con man running the country and where we are with COVID and where we are with race and all of that, how important is sports? As we sit here, you and I making 100 years of our life and feeding our family, your wife, all of us do this because of sports. It's how we've done it. But then I sit here and say, how important is it going to be the rest of my life? And I really do wonder that, because it's been so, to you and me and your wife and essential. It's been an essential part of our lives. I don't know how essential it's going to be moving forward. And maybe that's just being in the middle of the storm. Maybe we'll all want to run out to a game after we've had the shot like polio in the early 50s, right? Like once we feel safe, this is what we'll want to do. I'll probably want to go to a Stone show before I'll really have to take my wife to Target Field, and I do want to take her to Target Field, but I feel differently about music and family and beaches than I do like I need another ball game right now. That's how I feel.
Well, I agree with you in that I have missed it less than I thought I would, and both my wife and I make our living from sports, so I want it back, believe me, but can I live without it? Absolutely. I don't want to, but yeah, it's not essential in that regard as from a spectator standpoint. But where it is essential to me and to my family, and my wife and I have talked about this, and especially in this moment in America, is sports have brought our kids. I'm not into the build character and teaches them to win, all that stuff. So much of that is nonsense, and we've seen so many psychotic coaches in travel basketball and things like that. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about it has brought them together with people from other backgrounds, other races, other sexual orientations in the case of professional athletes, so for my wife, myself, and my kids, it has rounded us and exposed us to and connected us with so many people that we wouldn't otherwise become friends with had we sat in the backyard, playing cello, as noble as that is. So that to me, and you see it, much larger in professional sports and in the Olympics and things like that, where you really are brought together internationally. That to me is what's essential about sports, and that to me is what our big loss is. I mean, I can't stand the business of the Olympics and the steroids and all that stuff, but what we forget about is that there was a 2020 Tokyo Olympics, and those kind of things do, in a non-cheesy way, bring the world together in one kind of common language, if only for a brief time.
Well, Steve, I've talked a lot about race the last 6 weeks in my background, growing up in an all-white neighborhood where blacks literally were not allowed. It took me 35 years to figure that out. I didn't figure that out when I was 14. But I also look at it and say to myself, of all the experiences I had playing baseball, playing basketball, playing football, and people that if you've played a team sport in this country at all, and for any length of time, if you've traveled or just played a team sport in any way or worked in any team environment, in any normal job outside of sports, the fact that we are so upside down is really kind of astonishing, right? That it is so polarized, because the whole notion of sports and teamwork and all that nonsense that you sort of urinated on at the beginning, and I don't disagree with that, but it does bring, to your point, people together of different backgrounds, and that was always the part about sports, that if you played it long enough, you couldn't hate the other people because you saw you had too much in common, right?
Absolutely, and I think we've had so few sports moments since all this has started. What is probably, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the sort of sports moment for future newsreels was the Bubba Wallace NASCAR moment. Whatever led up to that, and the however badly NASCAR has handled that leading up to this moment, that was the visual of sports that I think of in this age that has been otherwise without sports.
Well, and conversely, then you have Colin Kaepernick, right, which was 2.5 years ago, I'm losing sponsors, stick to sports, you can't take a knee, respect the country, to now where we are, and Nike was on the front end of this with Kaepernick. But the NFL, through all of this, is really taken the wrong path from the very beginning, and now they're taking this path that they're going to bring 80 football players together in 3 weeks and all sweat together and think that they're going to somehow get a season out of this. Where's the NFL in all? You and I have talked for 20 minutes about everything but the NFL, and that's sort of the big red, white, and blue elephant in the middle of the room now, isn't it?
Well, they're the most arrogant, we'll do whatever we want to do sports organization that we have, and I can't imagine a scenario in which they're going to play. As far as I know, they're still planning to play a regular NFL season, aren't they?
Yeah, I have my flights booked to Houston and Indianapolis, places that I have the flight booked, and I'm thinking, I'm not going there. They're not going to be playing football. And if they are, they probably won't let me in anyway, Right,
but they definitely won't let you in. But when are they going to say that? Or when are they going to even mention that possibility? So I think the players, I know the players, are ahead of the league on these issues. Obviously, the league is at least paying lip service to, what Colin Kaepernick's protest was always about. 2 or 3 years too late, however long ago that was now. But the players, I think, aren't going to jeopardize their own safety. I think that's where, if baseball doesn't play, I think that's where that's going to come from also. The owners are not putting themselves in any peril in a Julius Caesar box at an NFL game. The players obviously are. And if the players don't play, and I think the same is true of college football also, that leadership is going to come from the players and not from the people who are so-called in charge.
Well, the politicians have always sort of leaned on the sports thing, right? After Kennedy was shot, after 9/11, all of those things. Are we going to play football this week? Are we going to play baseball? I mean, when are we going to get back to playing? Because if we're playing baseball, America's back on its feet, right? Like that. That's how this sort of jingoism has gone here for the better part of a century, right?
Return to normal, yeah. I don't think there's going to be a return to normal anytime soon. If returning to normal means returning to, what enabled all of this in the first place, then perhaps we shouldn't be returning to normal.
If you could redo any sports thing you've done in your life, any event, and do it again, what one would you do again?
If I could relive the same one?
Yeah, or relive it maybe in a different way. Well, maybe it's a sideways way of saying, hey, what's the greatest sports event you ever saw, Steve?
Right.
I've done cool stuff all over the world, World Cups and all this stuff. I didn't do Wimbledon, you know what I mean? And I don't know that I've been to French Open and whatever. But, you've done really weird stuff, like Didderati kind of stuff, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I did do one Wimbledon. I always said I wanted to do everything once. So I've been to an Indianapolis 500. I've covered a Wimbledon. Wimbledon was before they put up the roof, and it rained every day. And what I remember most from that, Richard Krajicek won the men's, and Steffi Graf won the women's. And but what I remember most from those 2 weeks were one, sitting there during another hours-long rain delay, and my colleague then from the International Herald Tribune, Ian Thompson, was leaving, knowing that it wasn't going to resume, and he was going to see Elvis Costello at the Shepherd's Bush Empire and had another ticket. Did I want to go? And I felt like I would stay there to make sure that it got rained out, because if it resumed and then Steffi Graf blew out her knee or something, I'd get in trouble. So I didn't go. Of course, I never resumed play, and I didn't get to see Elvis Costello at the Shepherd's Bush Empire. And then
so you were
also
watching The Detectives, is what you're telling me.
That's exactly what I was doing. And then during one of those rain delays, I don't know if this name means anything to you, but I recognize it as a '70s hit maker from my 1970s radio memory bank. Sir Cliff Richard got up and sang. I can't even remember what he sang now. He was just sitting in the stands. And
he is a really big deal. I had a British girlfriend in 1998, and I'll never forget having tea at her in her home in London, and she brought up Cliff Richard, and I'm like, he had like a hit back in the 70s, right? Like he had one
over
song,
here he did.
right?
Yes, he had one hit in the 70s.
Like,
and he had a million hits over there.
And he's a sir over there. He was like McCartney.
Yeah, people were going crazy. So, but that was 1996, and at the same time I was covering Wimbledon, I went and covered Euro '96 at Wembley, and I was there when England and Germany played in the semifinals, and Germany won on penalties, which is a long history. Both on and off the field with England and Germany, but involving penalty kicks. And Gareth Southgate, now the manager of England, missed the final penalty, and everybody went home sad. I mean, I hadn't thought of Wimbledon in a long time since you mentioned it. But if there was one that I could relive, it would probably be, and I knew it at the time, the 1991 World Series Twins Braves, which Game 7, one of the all-time great games.
Wow, I just had Tim Wendell on the show an hour ago. He wrote a whole book about it, right? Like
there you go, exactly. And so after that game ended on Sunday night, I had to file for Sports Illustrated on Monday morning, and I was living in New York, but I was staying at the house I grew up in suburban Minneapolis, and I drove my rental car to that house and wrote the story for the magazine in the same basement where I used to watch Twins games on TV while writing fake stories about these games on my mom's typewriter. But now I was writing the cover story for SI on this incredibly unlikely Twins World Series victory in for my money, probably the greatest World Series of all time to this day. And it was the loudest event still to this day that I've ever been in. The Metrodome, it just contained the noise. And I remember driving home from the Metrodome in a rental car long after Game 7 ended, and seeing a guy standing drunk, I'm sure, on top of a city bus, kind of surfing on top of a city bus. It couldn't have ended well for him. But I was so frantically turning the story over in my head, and I had the pressure of having to write it overnight, but I had the luxury of having just incredible material that I just witnessed. And so, that event, and I was also I was 24, 25 years old at the time. I would love to experience that kind of in slower motion now, and without feeling the crushing pressure of deadline and all that, and just enjoy it. I still haven't really watched any of those games in full. I don't know that I ever will, but at the time they were just a jolt of electricity and caffeine and nervous energy and everything else. And people think, well, you grew up in Minnesota, you're rooting for the Twins. I promise you I wasn't. The games were so good, the series was so close that whatever happened, whoever won Game 7 of the World Series in extra innings, it was going to be a great story to write.
I've had a crazy day, man. I had Tim Wendell on 2 hours ago. I had John Schuros on right before you, and now you. And all three of you have mentioned the 1991 World Series this morning. So, and Schuros was not happy that I mentioned it.
I'm sure Schuros probably didn't bring it up.
Steve Rushin is here. You can go and read his books and read his work. No one does it better. Nights in White Castle still out, as well as Stingray Afternoons, and memories of being born in the 60s and growing up on sports and cars and fun stuff in the 70s and 80s and good music like Cliff Richard. And I'm sorry you missed that Elvis Costello. I always tell my wife the night that I met her in New Hampshire, I was supposed to go to see Chrissy Hynde and the Pretenders that night at the Orpheum in Boston. I still have not been to the Orpheum in Boston, but I got a wife out of it 17 years later. You told me your wife's story last time because I pressed you on it, so I'm not going to ask you about that Sports Illustrated night again. Hey, man, always a pleasure. I hope we play sports. I hope we get back to sports. I'm skeptical, but I hope we all just stay safe and come out of this with a better country in a sort of a, I don't know, in a better place somewhere, right? I mean, I think that's all of us hope for that, right?
Absolutely. And, I sound like Debbie Downey here, but I believe me, I want sports to come back as much as anybody else, but let's do it safely so that I don't have to shut it down and restart it again in 2 years.
But one day I'm going to want to shake your hand if we ever get in the same room together. I'll bring Purell, okay?
You bring Purell, and I'll bring a tape of Cliff Richard's "Devil Woman." That's the song I was trying to think of.
Devil Woman, that was his hit. I Googled him. Apparently, he had like a hit.
She's just a devil woman with evil on her mind.
With evil on her mind, right. But he was like the 1958 Singer of the Year. Like, he was around before the Beatles, which is now I understand. Elvis. Yeah, that's why I understand, but if I sat next to him on a plane, I wouldn't know him. Which is always the big tell for me, right?
Well, if I sat next to him on a plane, I didn't recognize it. I'd ask for that falsetto, and "We Don't Talk Anymore." That's the other song that I was thinking of. You can tell I've done some light Googling since Cliff Richard came up. But yeah, I would recognize him.
All right. Well, he's getting up there in age. Maybe we'll see him at Wimbledon next time with strawberries and cream. Steve, I appreciate you, man. Thanks for always returning the call, and we'll send everybody out to give you some love on Twitter and make us laugh. Keep us informed, all right?
Appreciate it.
You got it. Steve Rushin, one of the greatest. He's my favorite sports writer. He's a Sports Illustrated, wrote a piece on handshaking and high-fiving, an ode and a wave goodbye to the sports handshake. Left Hangin' is the title. You can check that out at si.com. Find him out on Twitter. Find me anywhere the internet is served. Trying to stay safe, keep my face covered, my hands clean. I got my hair growing. I got 1985 hair. I got COVID due. It's all cool. It's not like this is going out on the internet for dozens or hundreds of people. Nasty at WNST.net finds me calm, local, and Baltimore positive, and always talking baseball on the 4th of July.